I never told my wife's family I owned the $16.09 company funding their paychecks. Then they kicked my daughter out in the snow on Christmas Eve. I let them believe I was just a rough, underpaid handyman for 8 years because my wife asked me to keep the truth quiet. Then, on Christmas Eve, they threw my 16-year-old daughter out into the snow while the rest of them stayed inside laughing, drinking eggnog, and pretending they were better than us. The night Sophie called me from that frozen porch, I was elbow deep in a burst pipe at a commercial property I owned. I want you to sit with that for a moment. My daughter was standing outside in a thin holiday sweater, shaking in 22-degree weather, while 40 members of her mother's family sat warm behind a lit window. I was 90 minutes away, soaked to the wrist in freezing water, fixing a building that had my name on the deed. That was the part they never knew. That was the part I had hidden for almost a decade at my wife's request. And that was the part that was about to end more than one career before the new year. My name is Daniel Whitaker. I am 41 years old, and I founded Whitaker Home Solutions in 2011 with $18,000 I had saved from working construction, one used van, and a contractor's license I had earned the year before my daughter was born. By 2023, that little company had grown into something I still sometimes struggled to believe was mine. We had 44 full-time employees, 3 regional managers, and roughly $16 million in gross annual revenue. We handled residential and commercial maintenance contracts across 5 counties. We were small enough that clients still knew our names, but large enough that property management groups and commercial landlords trusted us with serious work. I was proud of it, but not in the loud way people expect from business owners. I was proud in the quiet way that only people who have built something from nothing understand. My wife, Claire, was proud of different things. She was proud of her family name. She was proud of the Collins reputation. They liked to present themselves as old money, even though most of what they had was new money, anxiety wrapped in inherited manners. Her father, Martin Collins, had spent 30 years in middle management at a paper distribution company, and over those decades, he developed an unshakable belief that a man's value could be measured by his collar color, his neighborhood, and the cleanliness of his shoes. Martin used the word class the way some people use the word God, constantly, reverently, and almost always to look down on someone else. When Claire brought me home for the first time, I was wearing jeans and work boots. I drove a Ford F-250 with a mud flap missing on the passenger side. Martin looked me over the way a man examines fruit he has already decided not to buy. "Handyman," he said, not as a question but as a judgment. Claire answered quickly, "Field supervisor." That was the first lie. It came out of her so smoothly that I almost missed it. I told myself it did not matter. I was 33, in love, and completely disarmed by a woman who laughed at my jokes and never seemed bothered by my calloused hands. We got married 8 months later in a small ceremony. The Collins family showed up in coordinated outfits, like a team determined to make sure everyone knew which side of the room had pedigree. I wore my best blazer and received 3 little comments about it before dinner was even served. After the wedding, Claire sat me down with both of her hands around mine. She looked at me with those clear green eyes that always softened right before she asked me for something difficult. "They're proud people, Daniel," she said. "They'll never accept you if they know. Just let them think you're a supervisor. Please, let me handle my family." I should have asked what handling them was supposed to look like long-term. I should have asked what part of me she was asking me to bury, but I did not. I nodded, squeezed her hands, and quietly folded my entire identity into a box I hid in the basement of our marriage for 8 years. Here is what 8 years of silence looks like from the inside. You attend 43 Collins family gatherings. You sit at a table where your father-in-law jokes about your truck, your boots, your hands, and your work. You smile. You pass the bread basket. You listen to Martin describe your profession as glorified plumbing, while he wears a watch your company's quarterly profit could buy 12 times over. You watch your brother-in-law David Collins get hired because Claire quietly recommends him, and you quietly put him on payroll at $71,000 a year because you love your wife and want peace at Christmas. Then David's brother Marcus comes next. Then Martin's nephew Tyler. Then 4 cousins, 2 uncles, and a family friend named Greg that Martin personally vouches for. Eventually, inevitably, you open the employee directory, type the word Collins, and watch 11 names appear before you even finish the search. By the time I stopped pretending not to notice, 47 people in my company had some connection to the Collins family. Not all of them knew each other. Not all of them were actual relatives. Some were friends, in-laws, godchildren, former neighbors, or people Martin had pushed forward with that smooth confidence of a man who assumed every room was his room. But enough of them were connected that the whole thing had a quiet, cancerous quality. I chose not to examine too closely. I chose not to examine it because Claire asked me not to. Because I loved her. Because sometimes love is not one grand sacrifice, but the slow accumulation of little choices that seemed harmless at the time. I let Martin spend my money while mocking my boots. I let Claire's mother, Linda, a precise woman who wore silk scarves like armor, offer me money for a decent church suit at Easter dinner in 2019. I put the envelope back in her hand without opening it and said, "I appreciate the thought, Linda. The worst part was that I meant it. I told myself I was playing the long game. I told myself none of it mattered because I knew the truth, even if they did not. I told myself their opinions could not touch what I had built. I told myself a lot of things that sounded noble, patient, and mature. But underneath all of that, the truth was uglier. I was ashamed to disrupt Claire's happiness, even when that happiness was purchased at the cost of my dignity. Then came Christmas Eve of 2023. At 7:50 p.m. A main pipe burst at the Kellerman Commercial Plaza, a 72-unit property where we had held the maintenance contract for 4 years. The on-call technician, a good kid named Pete Reyes, got there first, assessed the damage, and called me because the issue had hit the main line and the fix required a judgment call I needed to make in person. I called Claire. She was already at her parents' house with Sophie, our daughter. I told her I would be 2 hours behind, maybe more. She sighed the way she always did when she wanted me to feel like I had chosen work over her on purpose. Fine, Daniel, she said. We'll see you when we see you. Then I drove to the Kellerman property, got into the crawl space, and started working. My phone rang at 9:12 p.m. I almost did not answer. I was halfway through replacing a coupling. My hands were filthy, numb, and stiff, and the water had already soaked through my sleeves. But Sophie's name flashed on the screen, and something parental and involuntary made me grab the phone. Dad, she said. Her voice was jagged, and I could hear wind behind her. Please come get me. I'm outside. It's freezing. I came out of that crawl space so fast that I cracked my shoulder on a beam. What? Where are you? What happened? She said. The front porch. Grandpa Martin was making fun of your truck again. The thing about the missing mud flap, and I just told him to stop. I told him it wasn't funny. She paused, trying to breathe through the panic. He got really mad. He said I was being disrespectful in his house. Then he opened the front door and told me to wait outside until I could apologize. My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. Where's your mother? The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but it told me everything. Finally, Sophie said, she said I should just apologize, Dad. I was already moving toward my truck. Sophie, listen to me. I'm getting in the car right now. I'll be there as fast as I can. Are you dressed warmly enough? She answered in a small voice. I have my sweater. I left my coat inside. 22 degrees. A thin holiday sweater. My 16-year-old daughter standing on a porch because she defended my name. I drove 91 minutes of road in 63 minutes. I remember almost nothing about that drive except the temperature reading on my dashboard and the strange, crystalline quality of the anger settling inside my chest. It was not hot. It was not explosive. It was cold. The kind of cold that does not warm up. When I pulled up to the Collins house, Sophie was standing at the far end of the porch with her arms wrapped around herself. Her backpack sat on the ground at her feet, like she had placed it there with the intention of leaving and then realized she had nowhere to go. Through the front window, I could see everything. Firelight, movement, the glow of the Christmas tree. Martin stood near the head of the table, laughing at something. Claire was near the kitchen doorway with a champagne flute in her hand, her head tilted in that charming way she used whenever she had an audience. She had not come outside. Not once. I took off my coat and wrapped it around Sophie without saying anything. She turned and grabbed me around the ribs the way she used to when she was small, and I came home from a long shift, and she would sprint across the living room like my arrival was the best part of her day. I held her there for a long moment while she shook in my arms. Then I walked to the front door and kicked it open. I did not knock. I kicked it. The door swung wide and hit the inside wall with a crack like a starter pistol. 40 people went silent in less than 3 seconds. Music stopped. Forks went down. 40 faces turned toward me. Martin stood by the fireplace with a drink in his hand, suddenly looking much smaller than he had through the window. I scanned the room until I found Sophie's coat on a chair near the door. I picked it up, turned back, and handed it to her. That was when Claire appeared. She crossed the room with that purposeful, smooth walk I had once admired. In her hands was a thick manila folder bound with a rubber band. She walked straight to me and pressed it against my chest hard enough that I either had to take it or let it drop. You've embarrassed this family long enough, she said. Her voice was steady. Practiced? Rehearsed. These are divorce papers. I want you out of my house by tomorrow morning. Behind her, Martin stepped forward with a grin that told me he had been waiting to watch this happen for a very long time. Best Christmas gift she ever gave herself, he said. Then he looked past me, through the open door at my daughter, and added, tell your loser father to put some gas in his trash truck before it breaks down on the way home. Someone laughed. More than one someone. I looked at Martin Collins. I looked at Claire. Then I looked around the room at every cousin, uncle, nephew, family friend, and relative whose mortgage I had in some way helped pay for the last 8 years. Some of them looked at the floor. Some looked at me the way people look at a dog that has outlived its usefulness. I tucked the divorce papers under my arm and said, you're right, Claire. It is time. Then I walked out. Sophie was already at my truck. They believed they had just thrown out a broke handyman. They had no idea what happened when the temperature dropped below 0. We drove for 20 minutes without speaking. Sophie sat in the passenger seat with her knees pulled up to her chest, her coat finally around her, the heat blasting as hard as the truck could give it. She stared out the window into the dark until she finally whispered, "Dad?" I said, "Yeah, baby?" She said, "I'm sorry I made it worse." I gripped the steering wheel until I could feel my knuckles ache. "You made it better," I told her. "You made it the truest it has ever been." She fell asleep before we reached the hotel I booked from a red light on Route 9. It was a Marriott courtyard, 2 queen beds, and a room service menu neither of us had the energy to look at until morning. After she fell asleep, I sat in the dark with the divorce papers spread across the desk and read them with a business person's eye. They were thorough. A family law attorney named Gregory Foss had drafted them. I looked him up immediately. 12 years in practice. A mid-tier firm. Specialized in high net worth divorces. That told me Claire had not done this on impulse. She had been planning long enough to do research. The papers cited irreconcilable differences. They requested the house, a significant portion of liquid assets, and listed my primary income source as salaried employment at an unnamed residential services company. Either Claire still did not know the truth, or she knew and had deliberately obscured it to limit what she thought I was worth. Either way, at 11:48 p.m., I opened my laptop, opened the employee directory, and typed one word, Collins. 47 names appeared. I want to be precise about this part, because it matters. I did not fire anyone out of anger that night. I did not make a single decision with my hands shaking or my jaw locked. I sat in a hotel room chair with terrible lumbar support and ran a full internal audit with the same systematic patience I used for every major business decision I had made in 12 years. We used audit software called Aprio for quarterly compliance reviews, and I launched it at midnight. I set the parameters to flag inconsistencies in every Collins-connected employee record going back 36 months. The results took 94 minutes to compile. I made a cup of terrible hotel coffee, sat back down, and read every line. David Collins, my brother-in-law and regional procurement supervisor, had been falsifying fuel card records for 19 months. The total discrepancy was $34,200. Company vehicles had been used for 3 family vacations, and the GPS logs did not match assigned route schedules. Marcus Collins, who worked in accounts receivable, had been submitting duplicate invoices on 6 client accounts and pocketing the difference through a shell email account he had set up with a free provider. It was almost elegant in its stupidity. The total exposure there was $61,400. Martin Collins himself was not on my payroll, but his name appeared as the recipient of 4 client entertainment expenses submitted by David and Marcus between 2021 and 2023. Restaurant bills, a resort stay in Scottsdale, 2 rounds of golf at a club that charged $400 per round. All of it submitted as legitimate business expense. I kept going. I had 47 employee files in front of me, and 14 of them showed some form of documented financial irregularity. The remaining 33 were clean. Some of them were legitimately good employees who happened to share a last name or a family connection. I separated those files. For the 14, I documented everything. I printed nothing. I saved the audit to the company's encrypted server, timestamped it, locked it, and then called my attorney. His name is Robert Kane. He had been my corporate attorney since 2014. Robert was 62 years old, had a face like a bloodhound, and had never once lost his composure in my presence. That was part of why I trusted him more than almost anyone alive. I called him at 3:47 a.m. He answered on the 3rd ring, because that is the kind of attorney Robert Kane is. I told him everything. I told him about the 8 years of silence, the Collins network inside my company, the audit findings, the divorce papers served at a Christmas party, and my daughter standing outside in the snow while her mother held a champagne glass inside. Robert was quiet for 11 seconds. I counted. Then he said, "Okay, here's what we do." He walked me through the plan in his methodical, completely unexcited way. First, he would file an emergency motion the next morning to separate my personal assets from any marital property claims. The house Claire had called hers was owned by one of my LLCs. The title was clean. The mortgage was paid by the company. Claire's name appeared nowhere on the deed. Second, Robert would send Claire a notice to vacate through Gregory Foss's office. Third, the 14 employees with documented fraud exposure would receive termination letters through HR, each one referencing specific policy violations and audit findings. The terminations would be legally bulletproof. 3 cases, including David, Marcus, and the Shell invoice situation, would be referred to the district attorney's office for review. Robert would also bring in a forensic accountant named Patricia Huang from his firm. Patricia was a CPA, a certified fraud examiner, and had 15 years of experience testifying in financial fraud cases. Fourth, nothing would be public. No press. No social media. No emotional explosions. Clean, legal, institutional consequences. This stays in proper channels, Robert said. You want justice, not theater. I said, I want both. He paused for a moment, then said, You'll get both. Trust the process. I slept 3 hours that Wednesday morning. When I woke up, I put on a navy suit I kept at the office for investor meetings. I drove to our glassfront headquarters on Harrington Drive at 8:30 a.m. and sat in my corner office with the city view and coffee that actually cost money. At 8:58 a.m., Patricia Huang sent confirmation that the audit documentation had been received, secured, and formatted for potential legal proceedings. She would be available to testify if the case reached that stage. At exactly 9:00 a.m., my HR director, James Okonkwo, began transmitting the termination letters. James had been with me for 6 years. He was rigorous, precise, and after I briefed him Tuesday night, all he said was, "I'll need 2 hours to make sure each letter is airtight." He took 2 hours. They were airtight. At 9:05 a.m., my phone rang. Martin Collins. I let it ring twice, then answered. Daniel. His voice had that quality it always had when he needed something, warm and forceful at the same time, like a shove dressed up as a hug. Some complete idiot sent termination letters to half the family this morning. I don't know what kind of HR circus you people are running over there, but you need to get me your supervisor's number so I can get this straightened out. I let the silence stretch for a full 4 seconds. Then I said, "You're already speaking to him, Martin." Nothing. Just the sound of a room that had stopped breathing. I continued. Whitaker Home Solutions. Whitaker, as in Daniel Whitaker. Founder, sole owner, and chief executive officer. He stammered, "That's not..." I cut him off. The audit found significant financial irregularities in multiple employee accounts with Collins family connections. David and Marcus are being referred to the district attorney for embezzlement review. The documentation has been secured by a certified forensic examiner. You will also receive correspondence from my attorney, Robert Kane, regarding your name appearing in 4 fraudulent expense reports. For the first time since I had met him, Martin Collins sounded small. "Daniel, please listen." I said, "The notice to vacate the property at 14 Ashwood Lane has been sent to Claire through her attorney. The deed is registered to one of my LLCs. She has 30 days. He said, "Just let me explain." I said, "Merry Christmas, Martin." Then I ended the call and blocked him. Within 45 seconds, my phone lit up again and kept lighting up. 12 notifications, 20, 31, 47 calls and texts from numbers I recognized and numbers I did not. Cousins, uncles, family friends, people who had been caught, and people who had simply been near the blast radius. One of them was Greg, the family friend who was actually a good plumber, and probably furious that he had been pulled into the fallout of people he barely knew. I would eventually separate the clean terminations from the fraudulent ones. The 14 with documented cause would stand. The 33 clean employees would receive severance and positive references. I was not going to burn innocent people because I was angry. I was angry, yes, but I was also precise. And anger combined with precision is far more effective than anger alone. I set my phone face down on the desk. That was when I noticed one notification I had not dismissed. It was a text from a number I did not have saved, received at 7:14 a.m., before everything had started. It read, "We need to talk." I know what Claire did before the divorce papers. All of it. I stared at that message for a long time. My first instinct, the one I am least proud of, was to ignore it. My life was already detonating in organized, legally defensible ways, and the last thing I needed was an anonymous text designed either to help me or manipulate me into doing something reckless. My second instinct was better. I forwarded it to Robert. He called me back 8 minutes later. "Do you know the number?" he asked. "No," I said. "The area code is local." He said, "Give me an hour." He called back in 45 minutes with a name. Karen Delaney, 44 years old, former employee of Gregory Foss's law firm, the very firm that had drafted Claire's divorce papers. She had worked there as a paralegal for 6 years. She had resigned 11 days earlier. I called her. She answered on the first ring. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, and her voice was careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed what she needed to say and was trying not to rely on the rehearsal. Before I could ask anything, she said, "I need you to understand that I'm not doing this for money. I resigned because I was asked to do something I wasn't comfortable with. I've been trying to decide what to do about it for 2 weeks. I said, "Tell me." And she did. Claire had not consulted Gregory Foss's firm 2 or 3 months earlier, as I had assumed from the thickness of the paperwork. She had consulted them 14 months earlier, in January 2023. According to Karen, Claire had been planning the divorce for more than a year, but that was not the most uncomfortable part. The worst part was what Claire had asked Foss to help her do. She had provided documentation about Whitaker Home Solutions, including corporate filings, estimated valuations, and asset listings. Then she had asked for advice on how to structure the divorce, so the company's true value would be obscured during the initial asset discovery phase. Foss had apparently walked her through a theory. If Daniel Whitaker's role could be characterized as salaried employment rather than ownership, and if the company could be listed only as an unnamed employer in the divorce filing, then the initial filing would dramatically undervalue the marital estate. It could force me into a long disclosure process that might take 18 months. Meanwhile, Claire could petition for interim support based on an artificially deflated picture of my finances. She had known for at least a year. She had known what the company was worth. She had known who I was while I sat through Christmas dinners and let her father call me a handyman like it was a stain. She had known, And she had been building a legal architecture to take as much as possible while pretending I was still the one embarrassing her family. Karen Delaney had been asked to notarize a document she believed misrepresented the company's ownership structure. She refused. Then she resigned. For 11 days, she sat with what she knew and tried to decide whether she owed a stranger the truth. She decided she did, and she told me. I brought Karen's information to Robert, and Robert brought it to Patricia Huang. Patricia, with her CPA, CFE certification, and 15 years of financial forensics, was the kind of woman who could describe an embezzlement scheme in court with the same calm tone a meteorologist uses to describe rain. She spent 6 days reviewing the joint financial accounts, corporate filings, and the documentation Karen Delaney provided. Her findings arrived in a 43-page report on December 31. The headline was simple and devastating. In the 18 months before the divorce filing, Claire had moved $340,000 from a joint savings account into an account in her own name. Across multiple transfers, the money had been characterized as household expenses. The movements were timed to avoid the $10,000 reporting threshold. Then the money had been moved into a brokerage account, opened in her maiden name, Collins, at a firm in another county. Patricia wrote in her summary that the pattern, timing, and structure of the transfers suggested deliberate concealment, consistent with asset dissipation in anticipation of divorce proceedings. That was forensic accountant language for a much simpler sentence. Claire took the money and tried to hide it. Robert filed an amended response to the divorce petition on January 4. He attached Patricia's full report as Exhibit A. He attached Karen Delaney's sworn affidavit, which she agreed to provide, as Exhibit B. He attached the corporate audit findings as Exhibit C. Gregory Foss, upon receiving that filing, withdrew from Claire's representation within 72 hours. I later learned through Robert that Foss had consulted with his own ethics attorney immediately after receiving our response. Whatever happened in that conversation, it ended his involvement in the case. Claire retained new counsel. Her new attorney, Diane Marsh, was sharp, no-nonsense, and apparently far more interested in surviving contact with the facts than pretending the facts did not exist. She called Robert that same week and opened with, "My client is prepared to discuss a settlement." That was when I realized how different justice looked when it was not shouted across a dining room. Justice was not a slam door or a viral post. It was documentation. It was timing. It was the right evidence in the right hands at the right moment. I want to be honest about something, because this story could very easily become about the satisfaction of watching people fall. That would make it smaller than it actually was. David Collins was charged with embezzlement in February. Marcus Collins was charged in March. Both of them retained separate attorneys, and as far as I know, at the time I am telling this, both are still navigating the criminal process. I do not take much satisfaction from that. They made choices. Choices have consequences. The county district attorney's office is the appropriate place for those consequences to unfold. The 33 employees who were terminated for non-fraudulent reasons received severance packages equal to 2 weeks per year of service, along with positive references. 3 of them have since been hired by other companies where I have professional relationships. One of them, a project manager named Celeste Ruiz, had been with me for 4 years. Her only real crime was being Martin's goddaughter. She called me 6 weeks after the terminations and said she understood. She told me she did not blame me. That call was harder to receive than almost anything else that happened during the entire ordeal. The divorce was settled in March. I will not detail the specific numbers, because that belongs between Robert, Diane Marsh, and the family court judge who reviewed the settlement. What I will say is that Claire's attempt to characterize my income as salaried employment did not survive contact with Patricia Huang's report. Claire received what she was legally entitled to, and not a dollar of what she had tried to engineer. She is living with her parents now. I know that because Sophie told me. Sophie, who spent the holidays with me in a hotel room eating room service. Sophie, who spent January helping me move into a rented townhouse with a working furnace and a guest room that I set up for her immediately. One afternoon, she stood in the doorway of that guest room holding a box of books and asked, "Do you need me to get more things from Mom's?" I said, "Only what you want." She thought about that for a moment, then said, "I want the books. I don't need the other stuff." Martin called me one more time on March 8 at 11:22 a.m. I still do not know how he got through on a number that was not blocked. Maybe it was a new work cell. Maybe someone in my office did not know better. He left a voicemail. I have listened to it exactly once. He sounded old, quieter than I had ever heard him. He sounded like a man who had spent his whole life standing in rooms he believed he controlled, only to look up and discover that the walls belonged to someone else. "Daniel," he said, "I want you to know that I didn't realize about the company, about who you were. I'd like to apologize for the things I said over the years, to you and to Sophie." Then he paused for a long time. "I didn't know. I have thought about that more than anything else." He meant it as an explanation, maybe even as a partial excuse. He meant, I did not know who you really were, so I had some justification for treating you the way I did. But that was exactly the wrong lesson. He did not treat me badly because he thought I was poor. He treated me badly because he thought it was acceptable to treat poor people badly. The only thing my money changed was whether he had consequences for it. I did not call him back. I did not block the number either. I just let the voicemail sit there in the list, unanswered. Somehow, that felt like the truest response. It is June now, 7 months since Christmas Eve. Sophie finished her sophomore year with a 3.8 gigapascals and a part-time job at a landscaping company. That was her choice, not mine, though I suspect she is building her own story about what it means to earn things from the ground up. She and I have dinner twice a week. We talk more honestly than we ever did when I was performing a smaller version of myself for an audience that never deserved the performance. Whitaker Home Solutions had the best first quarter in company history, with $12 million in the pipeline. James Okonkwo got a promotion and used part of his raise to take his family to Portugal, which might be the best sentence I have written in a long time. The navy suit is still hanging in my closet. I wore it to the January board meeting, and I will wear it to the next one. Most days, though, I wear whatever I want. Last week, I drove the old F-250 to a client meeting with a new commercial property management group. The potential annual contracts were worth 7 figures. Their CEO met me in the parking lot as I climbed out of the truck. He looked at it the way people sometimes look at old trucks, with a mix of confusion and respect. Then he said, "Good truck." I said, "She runs." We shook hands, went inside, and closed the deal. I drove home afterward with the windows down. The mud flap is still missing on the passenger side. I keep meaning to fix it. Maybe I will leave it.